What's the worst feedback you've ever gotten? Just kidding. Don't put that one in there.
The sad thing is something immediately did come to mind.
Oh, really? What was it, Michelle?
My first job, I got feedback that was unexpected. And I actually think that's the worst kind of feedback is when they haven't given you information along the way. And she questioned my integrity. And
Oh,
because she said you had kept telling me you had doctor's appointments, and I just assumed you were job searching. And I like literally pulled out my thing. I had a medical issue, and I'm like, she could see I crossed out because it was a paper one back then.
oh,
And then she's like, okay, I'm wrong. I'm wrong. But I'm just like, I was so like, it's still stuck with me. This is like 30 something years later. It's still with me.
oh my
I thought
gosh.
of something too. I think that's a good question. We
It's a
could have
good
so much
question.
fun with that in the chat.
All right. Yes. If anybody else wants to share in the chat, what's the worst feedback you've ever gotten? Tamara, you're up.
So, a few years ago, I was told that I should consider always wearing my glasses or dressing down or kind of not wearing makeup or something so that I would be taken more seriously.
Oh my gosh. What did you do? What did you say?
I was kind of speechless. I didn't, because the kind of feedback that it's not really that actionable. I guess they were trying to be helpful and giving me advice on actionable advice, but um I decided not to take the feedback and just be taken more seriously based on my own work and the words that I was speaking. And, it just drove me to be better, I guess.
Wow. Wow. You care too much, Sue. Oh, okay. All right. Let me kick us off, folks. Thank you so much for joining us. A couple of housekeeping things. First and foremost, I encourage you to use the Q&A functionality to submit questions. I will be watching those as they come in. I will weave them into the conversation, but I am not going to be watching the chat. It usually gets too chatty for me to really keep up with that as well. So if you have questions, please do move them over to the Q&A functionality. And then the other thing is we are recording today's session. So if you need to bounce early, you will get this recording in your inbox after this. I'm really excited to talk about feedback today because I've spent about a decade working with learning and development and talent leaders, and I've interviewed countless people about their work experience. And I am just fully convinced the key indicator of a company's culture and health and innovation and market competitiveness, it all really comes back down to feedback. Whether you want to call it coaching or performance management, but it really comes down to those growth conversations that people either are or are not having. And we have so many frameworks, people. We have so many great frameworks and so many good trainings. And yet, still, by and large, people are not doing this well. And we've been behind the scenes here at Cloverleaf building an AI coach to help people with these scenarios, and we've learned so much about the personal, individual barriers that people have. And so I thought, you know what? We should have a more public conversation about this with some of the best experts in the field on this subject. So here to help us understand why are people still struggling with this and what are tactical, practical things we can do for ourselves as well as our organizations to grow more relational curiosity for better feedback. Here with us to talk about that today is Tamara Miles. She has worked with Google and Microsoft and slews of more organizations. She's done research at UPenn. She's instructed at Boston College. She just launched her quickly best-selling book, Meaningful Work, and she challenges the way we think about relationships, innovation, and meaning at work. Tamara, thank you very much for joining us. We also have Joe Hirsch of Fearless Feedback. He speaks all over the world. He's been at TEDx, he's on Harvard Business Review, and he also goes inside of organizations to train their teams on turning what they're afraid to say into an energizing shared experience. Last, certainly far from least, Michelle Tills-Lederman is joining us. She is the author of 4 books. She is featured on New York Times, NPR, NBC News, CBS, Fox News. The list goes on. And Michelle teaches us how to become connected leaders that people actually want to follow. So So excited for all of you. Thank you very much for joining us. And Joe, I'm going to kick it off with you. Help us set the stage and understand, despite all that we have invested as organizations into feedback, what are really the barriers that people still have to giving and receiving feedback?
Yeah. Hey, Kirsten. And so great to be with Tamara and Michelle. Hey, everyone. I think one of the reasons why feedback fails so often is because we put way too much time and effort into being certain and not enough time and effort into being curious. And over indexing on our own certainty and under indexing on our curiosity, there's a cost to that. And what ends up happening when we approach these conversations too sure of ourselves, too sure of the other person, of what they're facing, of the situation that we're looking at, then we miss
Hmm.
things. And so
Hmm.
for the giver, if we approach with that kind of certainty, the cost could be not giving valuable feedback or not even giving accurate feedback. For the receiver, it could mean being too defensive, putting up those walls that end up forcing us to try to prove we're right instead of trying to improve our wrongs. And I think we can do better if we focus with a different mindset, a different message, something that's more fearless, something that's more curious. We can actually help people design and deliver the conversations that matter in a way that matters and shows that other people matter too.
Hmm. Yeah, Michelle, your worst feedback of just being told, "Hey, I think you're looking for another job," came in with somebody who was certain of what was happening rather than curious about what might be happening. Joe, how can an organization grow that humble curiosity?
It starts with every single individual, from the leader to the frontliners and everyone in between. And it begins with a change in the way we think about the purpose and the practice of feedback. It's not about what we do to another person, that power dynamic that often comes into play. Really good feedback is about what we do for another person. It's an act of
Hmm.
service. And
Hmm.
making that small shift, it's not even so small, it's actually pretty significant, from thinking about what we can do in service to another person to help that person grow, to help them see things differently. That is a fundamental change that really alters the feedback landscape inside organizations. When
Hmm.
teams say amongst themselves, we're going to have the courage and the candor to talk about what matters in a way that matters, and the humility to listen and to learn rather than to tell and to sell, then that difference is what enables people to become, in the language of Microsoft, we were doing a lot of talking about this earlier, to be learn-it-alls, to have a learn-it-all culture instead of a know-it-all culture. And when it comes to relational curiosity, that learn-it-all mentality of wanting to learn as
Hmm.
much as we can about ourselves as the feedback giver or as the receiver about the situation, that can change everything.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that's really good. And I know that we're going to get into a lot of those tactics of what we can actually do too as individuals to get that curiosity. But before we go there, Tamara, I'm curious about this from a cultural perspective because I know a lot of folks who are joining us today are responsible for culture and trying to transform their culture. And if we're all honest, there is a high level of, or at least some level, but probably a pretty high level of people feeling the need to be certain inside of our organizations, need to have the answers, which can lead to blame, defensiveness, like Joe was talking about. Can you, Tamara, talk to us about the research of
Yeah.
what are the ways that we can really influence cultural change away from that defensiveness and more towards that curiosity?
So one of the best ways, and that came up really strongly in our research, one of the best ways to affect change is to role model the behaviors that you want to see, right? And we know this from research on parenting, on research on education, but very strongly research in organizations as well. And whether you're a leader or a colleague, you have influence. The way you show up and your behaviors, your emotions, your energy are contagious, right? They're like a virus, it spreads. And if you are trying to create a culture of, what Joe was saying, a growth mindset, right? Be a learn it all. You have to model that behavior as well when you are either asking for feedback, and the research actually shows that it's more helpful to ask for advice than for feedback from people. They're more open to giving you advice than to giving you feedback. But actually, like going out there and saying, okay, what can I do better? What am I missing here? What else have I not thought of? So being the person who's like constantly asking for that, and it doesn't have to be, a big culture transformation in the year-end review. We're gonna restructure the whole thing. It can be every day in moments. We call it moments that matter, because our work experience is built on everyday moments that matter and add up. And I'll just also offer, there's research on a type of feedback that has been now coined magical feedback, right? And so if you're trying to give harsh feedback to someone in a way that they can improve, right? Let's say they did something and that they can do it better. One way to do that effectively is to say something like, and the research was done with students that wrote essays, and the research divided the students in two groups, and one group, and the both groups got the same amount of like red line and same type of feedback. But one group got a post-it note from the teacher that said, I'm giving you these comments so you have feedback on your paper. The experiment group got the post-it note that said, I'm giving you this feedback because I have high expectations for you, and I believe that you can, and I know you can reach them. And so
Mm,
even just framing it like that, like, yeah, you know
mm,
what? I have high expectations. I've seen your strengths. You are so creative. I know you can push this further. Even framing it like that can really strengthen our connection with that people and make the feedback much more, based on connection than just a transaction.
mm.
What was really cool about
I,
that same study, Tamara, that you mentioned? In that study, the students who received the magical feedback, over 70% of those students voluntarily revised
Right.
their essays. And of that group, 30% outperformed the group that did not get that magical feedback. And it just goes to show,
um,
when it comes to feedback, it's not about how much we know, it's about how much we care. And when we show
Exactly.
people how much we care, that's where the magic happens.
Right. Exactly. It's hard for anything to matter, right? If you don't feel like you matter. So when you feel cared for, somebody cared about me, then you want to work hard. You're much more motivated.
so what I'm hearing in that is, first and foremost, if we want to build curious cultures, it is critical to role model it. And part of how we role model that is by seeking out other people's perspectives on how we can improve. And you talked about how if you ask people for feedback, they'll give you less information, as opposed to if you go and you say, hey, I would like some advice on, how did I run that meeting, or how could I do this project better next time. So he's starting with role modeling by not only just how, like, starting with role modeling by how we receive and how we seek, and then moving it into when we do need to actually give somebody feedback on how they could improve, being sure that it is cloaked in, I care for you and I believe in you. And I have high expectations that I know you can hit.
Absolutely. It's so
Hmm.
important. Think about that. Like, I don't know, when you get bad feedback, I think we all kind of thought of the worst feedback we got, right? When you asked that question, how would it have felt different if it had been kind of stated with the magical feedback kind of formula a little bit?
Tamara, I believe in you. I have high standards. You should wear less makeup. I don't know if yours would have fit that.
Maybe not.
Mine wouldn't have worked
Maybe
with
not.
that
No.
philosophy, but yeah.
Yeah. All right, Michelle, I want to take it to you. So I have a signed copy of your book, The Connector's Advantage, and I so appreciate that you give practical advice in it on receiving feedback. And I want you to take us a little deeper. Why do you talk first about receiving feedback before you ever touch on giving feedback?
It really kind of supports what we just heard from Joe and Tamara, modeling the way, putting you
Mhm.
putting yourself in their shoes. But I also really was thinking about something Joe said about that curiosity versus conviction, right?
Certainty,
Or
yes.
Mm,
certainty. Thank you. A
mhm.
lot of times when a manager is giving feedback, they think they know the answer. They think they know what they should do, right? And they're just trying to guide them somewhere. So by putting yourself in the receiver's place, people buy into their own ideas more than they buy into yours.
Mhm.
I have kind of like a five uh, steps to think about in the reception of the feedback, because you can also, one, it's modeling the way, right? Understanding when feedback's effective to you, how it's effective, um, but it's also breadcrumbing when you're giving that feedback. So I think it teaches us how to be better at giving it if we're better at receiving it.
Mhm. If we better understand what it feels like to be on the receiving end, is that what you're saying?
And what to do with it, right?
Mhm.
What do we need in getting that feedback, right? So I always say there's five, it's the 5 A's, right? Absorb what you're hearing, take it in, watch your body language, don't be defensive, don't defend, don't explain, right? We want to story tell. Well, that's why this happened, right? Just receive. Ask
Mhm.
questions, probe deeper, try to get the specifics so you can visualize, you can really understand. And
Mhm.
then this is the beauty, this is the magic. Acknowledge and agree with something. Like
Mm.
I hear you, and I see that makes somebody feel that it's not as scary to give that feedback.
Mhm.
So you summarize, there's always something you can agree with. And this probably should be the first thing that you do, but appreciate and invite. So once they feel good about giving you that information, that you've been able to take it in, saying thank you, please give me more. Thank you, sir. May I have another? I don't know if everyone will get that reference, but thank you, Joe. You got it. um, Honestly, I think the first thing you say is thank you, and then you reinforce it later. And then, of course, apply. And so when you talk about that continuous cycle of feedback and that culture of feedback and modeling the way, if you go back and say, hey, I heard what you said. This is what I tried. What do you think? Did you notice? And I love informal feedback. And I talk about minutes, not meetings, posing 2 questions. Here's what I've been working on, right? Here's what you said. Here's what I've been working on. What have you seen that's worked? And what additional ideas do you have for me? And
Mhm.
to your point, Tamara, it's not about, um, tell me what I did wrong. It's like, hey, everyone wants to have an idea. Give me an idea.
Mhm. I think I'm reflecting on a personal situation I had just yesterday. I'm our chief strategy officer, and so people come to me when they think the company's not strategically fully aligned. And someone in customer success came to me and said, "Hey, the way things are getting sold lately, there's a couple of confusing points." And she said, "I don't know where I can speak up about these things." And I said, "Well, this we have this process in place. Did you try this? Does this work for you?" And she said, "Well, I did try it this one time, and then this is what happened, and it didn't work." And so I'm reflecting on that scenario where I was literally sitting there, Michelle, thinking, Kirsten, ask clarifying questions. Thank her so much for her feedback. Don't get defensive. Because, to me, this is like, oh my gosh, I'm so stressed by this scenario. I'm supposed to have fixed this by now. I don't understand why this is coming up again, right? And I think the hardest part for me in that was asking questions, like actually in the moment coming up with clarifying questions that I could ask that didn't sound like she shouldn't be thinking this way, that actually sounded curious, right? Because if I'm just being transparent, I was pretty stressed. And like it is hard to manage that, like it's hard to come up with true curious questions in the moment when you are feeling like confused and even frustrated or stressed, right? So how does a leader, or really a peer, how does anyone effectively navigate that to where they truly can ask better questions as opposed to asking questions in a way that might sound like, well, why do you think that? Or why didn't you try this? Right? Those types of questions will shut it down. Do you guys have magic formulas of how to ask better questions?
And it is all about the question and
Hmm.
word choice. So one of the words we're going to get rid of is why.
Hmm.
And
If you start with why, I mean, other than what Simon Sinek says, if you start a question with why did that happen? Why would you have done that? It just implies judgment.
Yeah.
So there's other phrases that we can have in our back pocket. Walk me through, or help me understand, or um, you know, my brain went here. How come? Like I see this whole creativity. Bring me along.
Mhm,
Bring me along feels really different, and you're
mhm,
asking to be taken in the mental journey with them. So really thinking about what I call actionable, positive, or neutral language. We don't realize how much nuance are in the words that we choose. And we think we're being subtle, but we're really being passive aggressive.
mhm,
And
mhm,
so when
mhm.
you like are just kind of like, I'm gonna just throw that word in there. You're doing it, they know you're doing it. Don't do it.
And I want to jump in too, because I think what you said is really important. Like, it's hard to be curious when you're feeling um, stressed or defensive. It's like a light switch, right? You can't access both. And I think, sometimes we think of emotion regulation only in like big things, like, oh, I need to go for a walk, or I need to go garden to get my emotions and those are great. But sometimes we need in the moment strategies also. And I think like sometimes just taking a deep breath and accessing a pause before you respond can be super helpful. And I think, like Michelle was saying, asking these kind of open-ended questions that don't start with why, but even acknowledging something like, oh, wow, I'm really surprised to hear that. Tell me more. Or, oh, okay, I wasn't expecting this. Help me understand how you got there. Like, even narrating your experience a little bit in your mind of like what's going on for you, so you're not defensive and saying, well, that's not how I see it, but to just acknowledge like, oh, I'm really surprised to hear that, I wasn't expecting that. That kind of puts everybody a little bit more at ease. And I agree with Michelle. Thank them for bringing that up first, because it's really hard to, if you have something um, kind of
Yes,
controversial to say, it's hard to bring it up.
Yeah,
But if
we
you
want
want to
to
it
build that
is.
culture,
we
yeah,
want
you have to.
we want to approach with grudges, but really what we need is more gratitude, not
Yes.
those grudges, because
Mm,
two things will happen if we approach with that gratitude. Number one, we're going to make peace with the past. Number
mhm,
two, we're going to win a feedback advocate. Because
mhm,
think about the number of people that actually have the courage to tell you what's really happening when it really needs to be said. There's very few people that will actually be willing to do that. I know that from personal experience. For me, the worst feedback I got was the feedback I never got.
Mm.
right.
And when you find those people who are willing to give you feedback, bring them closer. And the best way to do that is by making them see that you're actually taking their feedback to heart, that you're taking action on that feedback, and that you value what they said. Maybe not how they said it, but the fact that they shared that with you gives you insights that you can then choose to build upon and ultimately set as the basis for your own improvement. So thank you.
Hmm.
Joe, you just
Yeah. Go
I
ahead, Michelle.
I was gonna say, you just made me think about like feedback in our personal lives as well.
Hmm.
Right. We
Mhm,
we always talk about this concept of feedback at work, but I had a friend and we always like we'll go shopping together and she'll give me an honest opinion. And she'll be like, no. You know? And the appreciation that I've had, one time I basically told her, I'm like, you just lost all this weight, right? Like you're hiding all of it in that shirt because she loved it. And she turns to her daughter, she goes, have a friend like that. And for a moment, I'm like, oh God, did I say something terrible to her? And she's like, no, no, I mean it. Like, you need somebody in your life who's going to say the things to you that you need to hear. And so I want you all to think about the people in your life that are already doing this for you and have that moment of gratitude and let them know I appreciate you, because we need it in all aspects of our lives. Somebody
mhm.
to hold up that mirror to help us see.
Yeah. So what we're talking about here is also different power dynamics, right? So Michelle, that is a fantastic peer to have. Your personal life, your professional life, it's so important to have that peer feedback. I think, with the scenario I brought up and some of the other things we've been talking about, play in more to the power dynamic of an authority to somebody below them on the org chart, and the incredible importance of how you nurture that happening and how you model receiving that feedback and being curious and putting it into action and following up. and showing the gratitude for it. This reminds me also, though, of a few weeks ago, I was presenting to a couple hundred L&D leaders, and it was supposed to be similar subject to this. How do you get a culture of coaching in your organization? And what surprised me is a lot of them, I mean, a lot, the most common question I was getting was more about, hey, me, myself, I am not getting feedback from my authority. And I'm not getting helpful feedback. I don't know how to elicit it. How can I actually be getting better feedback? So Michelle, I'm curious your take on that. How do you actually effectively ask for feedback, especially from somebody that you report to?
I'm not sure it changes with the direction. I have to give some thought to that because I know I was telling you a story the other day about a leader trying to get it from her people because they're scared to give the feedback up. So,
Right.
right, we wouldn't expect the fear coming down, but it isn't necessarily about the hierarchy. It's about the personality type, right? So
Mm,
we have feedback tendencies. We all either like, I'm really good at giving the positive feedback, but right? Or I'm constantly giving the, growth feedback or the critical feedback,
mm,
but I'm never actually acknowledging when they do something well. And so one is to see what your tendencies are, right? Whatever level you are. Um, I think it again is in preparing them for it. So if you have somebody who might not feel comfortable in that feedback conversation, it's, saying, hey, I'm about to go give this presentation to the board, right? You're my boss, you're going to be in that room. Please watch for these things, right? Or this is what I'm working on, or this is something I'm trying to improve. And asking them for something specific and preparing them in advance that you're coming later to hear the specificity of that feedback. So people who need to take that time to process are more prepared and don't feel like as on the spot because a lot of times I was telling you about this woman who came to me for literally coaching feedback for the board, and she's like, I got nothing, they just said I was great. Because if they're not knowing what to look for, if they're not prepared for it, they're just gonna be like, you're great. And her content is amazing, her delivery is not.
mhm,
But she didn't specify what she wanted feedback on. And so later we
mhm,
had her redo that with that specificity. And she said she got so much, so many ideas about what the tweaks could be. And that made the difference.
mhm.
I'll underline that and then just maybe add one more thought. Michelle absolutely hit all the right points. I was also thinking as you were describing those great strategies that maybe it's not always that we have to go back to the typical well for feedback. We should think about where else we can draw these insights and information. And part of being a feedback magnet who draws those insights from all different places is the willingness to ask around, but to ask the right type of person. So maybe your boss is maybe the most natural person to ask about performance issues related to your work, but that person may not be best positioned to answer questions like, how do I present to my board? Maybe that's a friend of yours or someone who works in a different function, in a different industry or somewhere else entirely. So being willing to kind of go outside the typical sources and gather insights from multiple places and that widening of the feedback loop can bring new insights and new understandings. So yeah, attract those insights, but be willing to attract them from the less obvious sources.
I
Mhm,
love that. And I love that we think about, somebody who might be good at something, right? Whatever their position might be. But, you asked a specific question about getting feedback from the boss. Um, I think it is also positioning, and I come back to the advice, not criticism. And it could be, hey, what would you like to see me be able to do? And where do you see opportunities for me to test that out, to try that out? What advice would you have, right? You can even use that word advice, but you don't even have to use the word advice. But you want them to start to visualize you in another way.
mhm,
And so positioning yourself with, if you were to see me step up, and take it to the next level, what would that look like to you? What would I need to know to be able to do that? I can see you
asking a
thinking.
No, I like it. I love how you said you want them to visualize you in a new way. I think that's so insightful of when you are asking for feedback, two things you said. One, be specific, like, and especially if you can do it in advance. I really like that. I really like how Kim Scott says, if you're looking for feedback on something, ask for it specifically, like after the meeting. Hey, I am looking to improve how I present. Can you give me advice on how I can do that better next time? What's one thing I did great that I can continue doing? What's one thing I can do better next time, right? I love how Kim Scott talks about that. But I like that your add on that of give it in advance so that they are watching and they're thinking through it while it's happening. I think that's genius. And I love that nugget you added in there of the way that you frame it. How do you actually get their imagination started? Like, how do you get them thinking more creatively, envisioning a different, an evolved you, a future scenario? I think that's wonderful. And Joe, your point on it might not always be the most obvious person. It's like play to people's strengths. Who's actually a great presenter? If that's what you're looking for feedback on, right? Go to that person and ask them to watch you. Or who's great at spreadsheet formulas or whatever it is you're trying to improve in, right? I think that's really helpful. And also recognizing, yeah, the different personalities are going to come into play on this. Like it's the expertise, but it's also the personality type and what is really going to be the most helpful to evoke from the different personality types, the best truth for you to be able to move forward in. All
And
right.
if
So
they know
speaking,
that, well, if they know that you're coming to them specifically for their expertise, they're going to be more invested in that feedback. And so the quality of the feedback you're likely to receive when you frame a specific ask, but specifically to someone in these words, I recognize that you have a lot to offer in this area. I've watched you excel at this. Can you help me? And so when you put it in that position of, I need your help, I need your support, and you're great at this. So the person feels very empowered. The person also feels very invested. And that combination will likely bring the results you want.
Mhm. That's so good. You're starting it with a compliment to them, right?
Yeah, people want to know that you're asking me for a reason. Like anyone who has had any demands made of their time knows that when the demands are made, but the value proposition is not clarified, it seems like a very annoying request. And you don't want to help the person. But if I know that you're coming to me for a specific reason, you want to get better at making feedback fearless. You want to learn how to give a TED talk. You want to learn how to run a panel. So these are all things that when you come to that person, you say, can you help me with this? Because I've seen you do, or I've watched you do, or I've heard that you're great at this. They feel invested. They feel invested in you for taking the time to ask them. And they know that they have something to offer. And so
Mhm.
they'll take that offer seriously and they'll take the feedback more seriously.
I love that. That also makes me think of how like that's like a networking hack too. Like I'm a startup founder. We've had a lot of great success. We've been in, Inc. 5000 fastest growing companies. And so I'll get random startup founders I don't even know reach out to me and say, Kirsten, can you give me advice on how I can grow my business? And I'm like, I actually can't. Like, I don't know which part of this you're wanting, input on, right? But when you come with a specific, hey, I really admire how you did this specific thing. I want to learn how to emulate that. Can you help me grow there? That's a great cold networking outreach, actually. I might
Try it
steal that
today.
one, Joe.
Try it
Yeah.
today.
All right, I might. Joe, I want to stick with you. This has been super helpful in talking about receiving feedback and eliciting feedback for ourselves. That is so important because especially if you hold any authority, your symbolic acts speak volumes. They like that your actions speak louder than words. This is the way we can action that will instill curiosity, relational curiosity, humility, and model that for our companies. And we also, I want to switch the conversation now to when we actually do need to grow the people around us, and we have something that we need to help them see differently. And we don't want to make them defensive. We don't want to sound certain, but we do actually have in our minds a different end state that we need to help them get to. How do we do that in a way that's non-judgmental, empowering, supportive? How do we do that, Joe?
It's a good question. I would start by saying that the goal of feedback and delivering feedback with a more curious orientation isn't to tell people what to see. It's to show them where to look and let them see it for themselves. And earlier, Michelle, you mentioned the idea of holding up a mirror to another person. I think it's so true. This idea of enlarging and expanding someone else's vision and view of who they are and what they can become, who they can become. And if we approach these conversations with the simple goal of, I'm here to frame issues, not fix people, then we can have a more productive conversation. One of the great techniques that I picked up from a pal of mine, Michael McQueen, something he calls rate and reflect, I think is a really useful strategy here. And whenever you need to have those conversations that are focused on over the horizon goals, or maybe even a just in time issue, you can ask someone, to rate their own performance. So if someone on my team wanted some feedback about how they handled a client conversation, I would say to them, okay, so on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you think the client conversation went? 1 being not great, 10 being amazing. And they may say, I think it was about a 7, about a 7. A 7. Okay, so that's interesting. Why not higher? And that question, why not higher, pauses the whole conversation and gets them to reflect on why not higher. What could have gone differently or better to make it a 10, a 9, even an 8? And so by leaning in with curiosity and not telling them what could have been better, but allowing them to reflect on what could have gone better from their own perspective, that makes the conversation more constructive, less volatile, much more collaborative, and ultimately much more productive, because individuals are thinking and reflecting about what they could do differently. And we, the people on the other side of the conversation, are there simply to guide them, to show them where to look, not tell them what to see. And that opens up the conversation for so much more dialogue, so much less tension, and ultimately actionable steps that more than likely come from the other person, not from us. So it'll stick.
Yeah,
I
because people, as we said before, buy into their own ideas. And
100%.
adding one question to that, why not a 7? But also, what would it take to get to an 8?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the big themes that I've picked up through the whole conversation is this idea of question asking, like good questions, curiosity, right? We've been talking a lot about curiosity. And I think Joe's example is a great example of that, of prompting self reflection, like self
Mm.
curiosity, because I think that's like a really underutilized form of feedback too, which kind of veers into coaching, if I want to call it coaching, but it's like helping people self-reflect, because oftentimes we kind of know what what our strengths are, what we're good at, what parts of work we're avoiding or procrastinating, and why. And just like having these discussions where you're not, again, pointing out, well, I've noticed that you haven't gotten that report done in 3 weeks. Are you procrastinating on that? But just asking, like, what parts of work energize you and get you excited and allow you to use your strengths? And which parts of work do you avoid? Why do you think that is? And just kind of helping people learn the self-reflection tools and opening up that dialogue in a curious way, I think just it can be transformative.
This reminds me of a time when I was probably 23, first real job, and I totally dropped the ball on something. It was actually like I didn't do the thing. Your example, your story tomorrow just reminded me of this. I had something I was supposed to deliver to a client like 2 weeks earlier, and I hadn't touched it. And my boss came to me and wasn't like, "What are you doing? Why didn't you do this?" No why. He was just like, "Hey, this is I've noticed this is late. Can you help me understand?" And oh, that was so honoring because honestly, my only good answer was, I just don't know how to do it. And I should have asked for help. And oh my gosh, I'm so sorry I didn't ask for help. I didn't like, you know what I mean? Giving me the moment for self reflection was honoring towards me as opposed to just saying, you made a huge mistake. Don't ever make this mistake again. Right. That wouldn't have helped me grow. That
Exactly.
wouldn't
And
have,
it would have just shamed you. And who wants, who wants to feel that? Like you're already kind of embarrassed that you dropped the ball. that you should have done it, that you didn't. So it's just so helpful when somebody can come and approach it with curiosity and help you just reflect on it.
Yeah, Tamara, I've heard you talk about connection over transaction. Can you color this in with that wisdom as well?
Yes. And so, I study meaningful work, like what makes work meaningful. And, there's a lot of misconceptions that like we have to be saving lives for work to be meaningful. But what we actually find in the research is that every job can be meaningful, and it comes down to these moments of mattering, these moments of meaning, and they exist in our lives at work through what we call the 3 C's. So it's community, contribution, and challenge. And so this idea of connection, right, lives in the community, C. In order for us to feel like work is meaningful and for us to give our all and be motivated and inspired and engage in all those things that we all want to perform at our best, we need to feel like we matter to the people we work with. So community is about feeling like you belong, you can be yourself, and really community says you matter here. And in our research, the number one question that predicted a sense of community was this: does your leader care about what's happening in your life outside of work? Not does your leader know, but like, does your leader care? And so when we build these moments of connection, oh, tell me, what happened this weekend? Or, oh, I remembered that you told me your kid was going to have a soccer tournament. How was that? Like these 30-second interactions really help us feel connected to each other. And then it's much easier to come from a place of positive regard when we are giving feedback, whether that's constructive feedback or positive feedback, because we know that we have that connection with someone and we can be clear, right? We're not trying to be nice, we're trying to be kind, and clear is kind. And whether that is clear on negative or clear on positive feedback, whatever the feedback is, the advice, whatever we want to call it. But when we're having those conversations, if we have the relationship first, it is much easier to give and receive.
Laura, you're
Mhm.
speaking my love language. I just love everything that you just said. And you referenced that I talk about connected leadership.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
it- that embodies it. And I always say there's only two things you need to do to be a connected leader. Show your people you care about them as people,
Mhm.
and show your people you care about the things they care about. Right. And that could be the soccer game, and that could be, the whatever else.
Yeah.
So that is another way of modeling the way,
Yes.
is asking those questions. But also, I was thinking about how we as leaders respond when something doesn't go well. To your story about when you were 23 and how that boss responded to you. They didn't put you in the bad girl chair and wag their finger. So another way of thinking about how to create this culture of connection, this culture of conversation, of curiosity, is to think about how do you respond when something doesn't go well, because that tells people more than anything else.
It really does. Exactly. How do you respond when things don't go well? How do you respond when somebody gives you difficult feedback? How do you respond? I mean, that this was the number one meaning killer that in our study. Leaders who don't role model effectively, who don't walk the talk, or KPMG, one of our clients calls it closing the say-do gap. You can't have values of transparency and integrity and all of that, but then if you don't role model those behaviors, if you don't accept feedback but want to just give it, like, people have very high BS detectors and they will just discount everything you say.
This reminds me, I was on a flight recently and I was sitting next to a woman who I just commented on the movie she was watching. And of course, it turned into a conversation about feedback at work because that's what happens. And she was telling me that, she's in this global organization and they just did away with annual performance reviews. They're done with them. I was like, well, that's interesting. Why did they do that? She said, well, they want a culture of continuous feedback. I said, how's that going? She said, it's terrible. It's not happening at all. Well, why not? Leadership isn't modeling it. Well, what does that mean? When we give feedback to leadership, they don't implement anything.
Hmm.
And I thought that was that feels like a parable to me in so many ways, because one of the things she talked about was culture and structure. They want a culture of continuous growth-minded conversations. And so they changed the structure of performance reviews only happen once a year too. Now they should be happening all the time. We don't do anything with our structure. They removed structure to try to create culture, but did not have not figured out a way to change the culture. And to her, the biggest reason why is because of those symbolic acts, that modeling that leadership is not doing. Man, that felt like a parable for all that we've been talking about. Okay, we have a culture that, or question that has come in from Juliana. She said she has a boss of just over a year. She doesn't feel defensive when she gets feedback from her boss, but she feels anxiety over the lack of FaceTime and coaching and check-ins with her boss. So she has started to decide that I've started deciding what this is about is for the boss, instead of asking her about it. How can Juliana get this relationship back on track? Michelle,
Hi, Juliana. I know her.
are you her boss?
I am not, but they have been a client. The first thing I want to say is let's drop that last question, because the relationship is not off track, right? And so the feeling that way and framing it in your own mind will raise that tension and anxiety about any of these conversations. So how do we, grow and evolve the relationship? Remember, neutral, positive, actionable. This statement, this question has a conclusion based in it, and we want to come from that place of curiosity. So the other thing is great awareness that you realize that, okay, somebody else is responding to it. I love the awareness that you realize you were telling a story to yourself about the reasons behind somebody else's behavior, and that those are based on assumptions. And we usually tell the worst possible story and then believe it. So I love that you have an awareness to say, hey, I don't really know. And so your opportunity is to go and be curious and say, hey, what's going on with you? It seems like you're really busy. We haven't had a lot of time. Where can we fit that in? I would really, and then again, giving that purpose. I think I don't remember who, but all the brilliance on the call today was talking about how to say, like, I see you do this well, and I see how amazing you are, and I want to learn from you, right? And I would love to get some more time on the calendar. And don't worry about why it didn't happen. Just enable it to happen.
I think that's
Yeah.
one thing I'm seeing a lot with clients, and I think this is like even more of a COVID and post-COVID phenomenon, is that, the amount of time we spend in meetings has significantly increased. And so I am noticing people taking one-on-ones off the calendar or skipping them. And I think that might be a misguided action, because there are a lot of meetings that don't need to happen, but especially when we're more remote and not together, it can feel really transactional to just do the work versus keeping those moments of connection. And I don't know, Juliana, if that's something that happened where you don't have one-on-ones and that's being skipped, but I totally agree with what Michelle said. And even what Tiffany put in here, like trying aligning on goals and approaching it and bringing it up.
We have a great question from Chong in here. Any ideas how to relate to someone who consistently has no comments to any probing questions you ask? The serious introvert, or the just person of few words. How do you probe more?
Well, I would ask about why there's a lack of asking. So something along the lines of, so do you have any thoughts? And they'll say, nope, no, I'm good, right? Nothing to say. And you're like, well, I'm curious. Have you thought about, and then you can direct the conversation in a certain way and get them to think about a particular, like a guided ask. If that doesn't work, then one thing you can do, especially if you know this person isn't terribly communicative in these one-on-ones, maybe it has to do with the format, and that individual just doesn't really like sharing or feels anxious about having the one-on-ones with their boss. So maybe to shift the format and to ask the question ahead of time, what could we do to have a productive conversation here? Would you like us to take this offline? Maybe I'll do some thinking. about things that I'm seeing. You do some thinking about things you're feeling, and we can both prepare our thoughts ahead of time, share them with each other. And then the conversation already begins with understanding, or at least more insight. And so by staging those conversations ahead of time, you might be able to open people up a little more, especially if they're naturally resistant, because the resistance could be coming from a point of anxiety. It could just be they need more time to think, need more time to process. And we're asking them to do something that's just not in line with their styles, with their preferences. And we want to meet them where they are, not force them to meet us where we are.
I want to jump in here. I love what you said, Joe. And I wasn't clear from Chong's message if this is on a one-on-one or in a group situation. And I think in a group situation, it can be even harder because there are people who, are faster processors and they jump in and they speak and then they speak again. And it's harder for the people, who might be a little quieter or need a little bit more time. And so one of my clients actually had like a rule, like a value for their team meetings that was no one speaks twice until everyone speaks once. And so this did two things. It allowed it set the expectation that everyone's voice is welcome. We want to hear what everyone has to say. So everyone's expected to contribute. It set that tone, but it also kind of quieted the more like the louder voices who wanted to keep it speaking up. And, there were times when some people really didn't have anything else to add, but they would have to speak up and say, I heard everything. I don't have anything to add right now, but I'll keep thinking. It just made it really productive. And so, Chong, if this is the case where it's in a group setting, exploring something like that, where it's like just setting real clear expectations that everyone's voice is welcome. We want to hear all the opinions and all of that might be helpful.
That's where my brain went. In addition to everything amazing that you both said, is the setting of expectations. So if it is in a one-on-one or in a group, saying, I want everybody to come in with 3 specific ideas as an answer to this question, or whatever it is we're posing, specificity and clarity of expectation. It's not come in with ideas, it's come in with 3 ideas.
Yeah.
And that can make a difference.
I agree. I want to jump in here with a quick story about expectations. So the best learning environment I've ever been in is Angela Duckworth's classroom. Like she was the best professor I've ever had, like hands down, amazing. And we were not ever allowed to leave her class without handing in an exit ticket. So she used to make us always, at the end of each class, um, write down in a little piece of paper, like a 3x5 note card, what's one thing she can do to be better next time she comes in to it can be individually to be better for you. What would help you learn more in my class next time? And so the expectation was set. I thought there was like no room for improvement there. She is like perfect. And yet every time I was like, okay, I got to come up with something. And that expectation being set really helped. And she would implement it. The next class she would come in and say, oh, I got this feedback and this is why I'm doing it this way. And I mean, it was like
Wow.
role modeling on growth mindset right there. It was amazing.
Is
That's
there
amazing.
is there any better expectation that we can set than the expectation that feedback should be a relationship and not
Right.
just a rating and not just a
Mm.
report?
Right.
And clearly you felt that and your classmates felt that here was someone who genuinely wanted to develop a relationship with you.
Right.
And that feedback was just a means to a better relationship. And I think
Mm.
if we sort of underline that, the idea that feedback is about improving relationships and not just transferring information, that we're here to show how much we care and not how much we know, then others will ultimately find solace, but also take that as a cue and a permission to be able to share that feedback up, right? To talk to the boss who doesn't necessarily invest in the feedback relationship the way you want. And you say, well, if they're not going to be the one to take the lead on this relationship, I will. And of course, it gets to how you frame it and how you focus it. But at the end of the day, relationships take work, they take 2 people. And so
Mhm.
knowing that you as a feedback giver have another person that you're responsible for on the other end of that conversation and vice versa, it sets the stage for what will not just be a conversation, but a commitment. And it's a commitment to ensuring that we bring out each other's best, because the best thing we can do to help another person is to bring out their best. And feedback's one of those ways.
I want to jump in here because I love what you said. And I think, when we hear the word feedback and bringing out the best in people, we often, our brains go to our negativity bias, right? And go to like the corrective feedback. And I think one thing that we don't talk enough about is the power of positive feedback. That's something that came up in our research. And then when we dove into the academic literature, there is almost nothing on positive feedback. And there are studies being done now, a lot of studies, experimental studies on positive feedback. But there's some research. So Gallup and WorkHuman did a white paper together, and they found that one thank you once a week from a manager is enough to cut burnout and disengagement in half, right? One thank you once a week. And I think that's underutilized because for, there's barriers. We talked about barriers to feedback. I think Joe mentioned several in the beginning, but I think there's barriers to positive feedback too. Even though we think like, oh, it's easy. It's not, it can feel awkward. It can feel like, oh, well, they're not going to believe me. It's going to be inauthentic. Well, it's only going to be inauthentic if you don't mean it. And I think, so there's a client of ours who works in audit, and auditors are always looking for what's wrong with their clients, right? And so they had that culture, and we did a workshop with them, and she learned about the power of positive feedback and some models and all of that. And she decided that every Friday she put a meeting on her schedule every Friday afternoon to write 5 sincere and specific gratitude emails to her team. And she was thinking, I'm going to try this. And it was amazing what happened. Not only did people really feel seen and noticed, but they started then writing gratitudes to their colleagues and back to her. And it just created this amazing culture where people were noticing the positive, giving positive feedback, noticing each other. And so I think we also have to talk about positive feedback.
I love this.
Amazing.
I have a client who also, he goes, it's Snowflake Day, and that's when he sprinkles his appreciation across his team. And I actually don't think it should be once a week. I actually think, you should think about making sure you say thank you to someone every day.
I agree.
When there's a lot of studies and research behind, positive to negative feedback and how to balance it, and the Oreo, like good, bad, good, or
Don't do that.
like
That's
industrial
terrible.
psychologists are like 3-to-1 ratio. I'm like, forget all that. I do believe, though, starting with the good and letting people know that they are seen, felt, and heard will open them up to receive the areas for opportunity, right? Like, here's what's next. Here's what you can work on to continue. There's always good, even when we're like, okay, this is bad, right? What is the good side of that? And so people, I think, listen best when they feel they have been seen and heard.
Okay, we clearly could just keep going. I appreciate how all of you are riffing. There's so much more that people can learn from these tactical things you have shared. Thank you very much for the specific wording, the questions to ask, the ways to think about what might be blocking somebody else. There and positive feedback. I want to give everyone else a chance to still keep learning from you. So real quick, can you all share with folks, how can we follow you? How can we work with you? What are the ways that people can find you to keep helping with this? Tamara, let's start with you.
Sure. So you can find me on LinkedIn and Instagram, also on my website, which is tamaramiles.com. And I work with organizations doing speaking and leadership development and training, and also read my book right there, Meaningful Work.
Awesome. Joe.
First, congrats to Tamara on the new book. It's a great book. Definitely recommend you go and get a copy. You can find more ways to make feedback fearless and to communicate with confidence, make every conversation count over at joehirsch.me. Love to connect.
Awesome. Michelle.
I actually just put my website link in the chat to make it easy because my name is long. It's Michelle with 2 L's, tillisletterman.com. And Letterman is not spelled like David Letterman. It's just pronounced like David Letterman. We use a D instead of two T's. So from there, you can sign up for my newsletter. I will send you some motivation once a week. You can find me on LinkedIn, on Instagram, and you can just reach out on my contact form and tell me how I can help.
Thank you, all three of you, very much. I appreciate the wisdom you have shared with us. Everyone, have a great rest of your Thursday.